What if the team that everyone gave as a reference after 2025 actually left the second week of Bahrain with more doubts than certainties? Because while the focus was on lap times, inside the Papaya garage there was talk of problems and limitations. It was not an isolated failure. It was not a simple setup adjustment. It was Oscar Piastri who hinted that the MCL40 is fast, but extremely delicate. And when a champion car begins to show fragility in testing, the question is no longer if it can win, but if it can sustain the pressure when the season really starts. The second week of testing in Bahrain was not simply a continuation of the work started in the first days. It was the moment where the masks began to fall. Because when you're no longer testing basic parts or checking primary systems, but tuning actual performance, that's when the car reveals its true personality. And the MCL40 showed something that internally set off moderate but real alarms. It is fast, yes, but extremely demanding. Oscar Piastri was the first to verbalize it. Not with drama, not with panic, but with a clarity that in Formula One is rarely coincidental. He spoke of problems and limitations. And that combination of words is not minor. A problem can be corrected. One limitation implies that there is a structural ceiling that they don't yet know how to break. During this second week in Bahrain, the team stopped focusing on simple performance simulations and began to understand that the car's operating window is narrower than they expected. On long runs, the MCL40's behavior began to become erratic. Tire management wasn't disastrous, but it wasn't solid either. The balance changed when the fuel went down, the rear axle progressively lost stability, and the car required constant steering corrections. This forces the pilot to exit attack mode and enter control mode. And when that happens in testing, you know that in the race it can become a serious strategic problem. Bahrain does not forgive degradation, and if the car already shows sensitivity there, the concern is logical. But the drama didn't just stop at the rubber. The new hybrid system and energy integration of the package also added complexity. In the second week we sought to squeeze out real performance, and then another difficulty appeared. To go really fast, the car needs to be in an almost perfect thermal and energy window. If the battery is not in the ideal point, if the mapping is not exact, if the temperature of the set rises even slightly, performance drops. That means they are still learning how to unlock the full potential without compromising stability. And when a car demands surgical precision in every parameter, the margin of error is reduced to a minimum. It is not a forgiving single-seater. It's a car that can look dominant in one simulation and vulnerable in the next. That inconsistency in testing is not a minor detail. It is a sign that the overall balance is not yet completely dominated by the team. Internally, the most disturbing thing was not losing a few tenths in isolated times. It was the feeling that Ferrari and Mercedes seemed more linear in their programs, more predictable, more comfortable within their operating window. And when your rivals convey stability while you are still adjusting critical micro details, the pressure increases even though publicly everything seems under control. McLaren did not emerge from the second week of Bahrain in crisis, but it did come out with an uncomfortable certainty. The MCL40 is not a simple evolution of the champion car. It is a more aggressive machine, more optimized, more on the limit. And that has a price. Each system is so tight that any small deviation is amplified on the track. While McLaren refined balance and sought stability in long runs, Ferrari and Mercedes seemed to complete more linear programs. Not necessarily more spectacular headlines, but more consistent. And in the preseason, consistency is worth gold. When you can repeat times with little variation between stints, that indicates that your operating window is wider. And that feeling was precisely what began to settle in the paddock. In long simulations, the MCL40 showed very competitive peaks, but also more pronounced performance drops when degradation appeared. The car could be the fastest on a specific stretch, and a few turns later lose stability on the rear axle. This forces us to modify the driving style, adjust the differential, and manage energy more conservatively. Ferrari, on the other hand, seemed to maintain a more consistent pace lap after lap. Mercedes, although perhaps not as explosive, gave the impression of having a solid and predictable foundation. And here is the heart of the drama. In Formula One, a fast but capricious car can lose more championships than a slightly slower but stable one. McLaren pushed the limits with the MCL40. It is an aggressive evolution, optimized to the maximum in key areas such as packaging, aerodynamic efficiency, and energy management. But when you tighten the architecture of the car so much, you reduce the margin of tolerance. And that was noticeable in the second week of Bahrain when they began to work with configurations closer to real race specification. Additionally, the new hybrid system adds another layer of strategic difficulty. It's not just a matter of when to deploy power, but how to sustain it without compromising temperature and degradation. If the system requires millimeter precision to maintain optimal performance, any small error during the race can translate into an immediate loss of pace. And that, against rivals who seem more comfortable with their package, generates pressure. Internally, the concern is not that Ferrari or Mercedes are half a second ahead. The thing is that they could have a more flexible platform to evolve. If your car is already born with clear limitations, each future update has to make up more ground. Do not start from neutral, parts from a slight structural disadvantage. And there is another factor that weighs: recent memory. In 2025, McLaren successfully reacted mid-season. But depending again on a big saving update is playing with fire. Bahrain's second week made it clear that the MCL40 is not a simple continuation of dominance. It is an ambitious project that is still in the deep understanding phase. And this is where the drama stops being technical and becomes strategic. Because the second week of Bahrain not only exposed that the MCL40 has a narrow window, he also made it clear that McLaren does not have much time to resolve it. The calendar does not wait. And when the first races begin, each point lost due to degradation, each mistake due to overheating, or each poorly managed stint can become a wound that carries over throughout the championship. The real problem is not that the car is complicated. The problem is that it demands perfection in an environment where perfection almost does not exist. If the MCL40 needs balance, energy, temperature, and strategy to be aligned to the millimeter to perform at its best, then any external variable, extreme weather, unexpected safety car, traffic, wheel-to-wheel fight can take it out of that ideal zone. And that in a long season is dangerous. Ferrari and Mercedes may not have the most aggressive car in the paddock, but if they have a more forgiving platform, they can maximize results even on imperfect weekends. McLaren, on the other hand, seems to depend more on everything fitting together. And when you depend on everything to be perfect, the internal pressure increases. Engineers working overtime, more aggressive simulations, more conservative decisions to avoid failures. And little by little the focus changes from attacking to containing risks. In addition, there is a psychological factor that cannot be ignored. Oscar Piastri has already made it clear that they are still understanding the limitations of the car. That means that even the drivers don't feel like they've unlocked 100% of the potential. And when a driver doesn't have full confidence in how the car will react at the limit, he unconsciously leaves room. That margin is tense. And those tenths in 2025 could be the difference between pole and third row. McLaren is at a technical crossroads. It may be that these limitations are simply the initial price of an extremely ambitious evolution, and that once the package is understood, the MCL40 will become the absolute benchmark. But there is also the scenario where the team spends the first few races fine-tuning details while its rivals score points with greater regularity. The MCL40 is not a bad car. It's not slow. It is not unstable by nature. It is, in fact, an extremely ambitious machine. But that is precisely the key point. It is a car that lives at the limit of its own design. And when a car is born so tight, so optimized, so dependent on a perfect window, any small deviation becomes a visible problem. Oscar Piastri did not set off a red alarm. It ignited something more subtle and perhaps more worrying, confirmation that the team is still figuring out its own creation. And that, in a championship where every tenth counts from the first race, is a real risk. The drama at McLaren is not in the media. It's not a crash. It is not a public crisis. It is a silent drama. It's the internal pressure of knowing that the car can be a champion, but only if they understand it before their rivals consolidate their own strengths. It's the tension of looking at Ferrari and Mercedes and wondering if they already have a more stable base to build on during the year. The season is not won in tests, but many times you get lost there if you don't interpret the signs correctly. And the signal that Bahrain left is clear. The MCL40 needs surgical precision. It needs perfect execution. Needs rapid evolution. Now everything depends on one thing: the team's ability to extend that operational window before the real war on the track begins. Because if McLaren manages to tame this car, it can mark an era. But if the limitations detected in this second week of Bahrain carry over to the first races, then what seemed like the beginning of a confirmation may become the beginning of an uphill struggle. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.